Hey guys, I'm Tom and I make electronic music under the name Bamboo Leaves. If you're new here, this channel is for those of you who want to learn about making and releasing alternative electronic music. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can catch more videos as I post them. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down a track in the style of Tycho. This video has been requested by a few of my regular watchers, so I hope I can do the job. Tycho has a unique style that revolves around retro-sounding synths and drums combined with plucky guitar riffs to give a mellow vibe. If you enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and you can get that algorithm going. So with that out of the way, let's jump over to the DAW now. Okay, right, so let's play this track for its entirety. So let's start from the top and work our way down. First up, we've got this retro lead sound. So something that I'm getting from that Tycho style is that sort of detuned retro lead synth sound. So let's play it on its own. Right, to get this sound, I used the retro synth. What have we got? So we have a square wave with a pulse width pushed up, and we've got a sawtooth wave, and it's mostly towards the sawtooth wave in the mixed. I've got this filter that I think I will automate later on, so we'll have a look at that. And that will just move up and down, and I've got that mapped to this filter envelope. So this is how it sounds without any of those processing bits on it. So that sounds really out of tune and kind of weedy. It doesn't sound really at all like it does when you've got all of those effects on there. So that out of tune element I've got is because I've got a vibrato that's kind of moving quite slowly and taking it quite out of tune. So to get that, I've got this vibrato depth of 0.88 semitones, and I've taken this vibrato wheel down. So without that, it would sound more in tune. Take it down. What I've got on there is I've got a tape delay. The tape delay, I'm not actually delaying it, I'm just using it for its tape characteristics. So this is how it sounds with it after without it. So without it, with it, not too much sound in there, but I've also got this modulation on here. So this will push it further out of tune with this LFO rate and this LFO intensity that sort of mimics the tape wobble that you'd get if you're recording onto tape. And it gives it a bit more of that retro sound along with it. So that sort of fits in with Tycho's style. Next, I have a vintage verb with a big decay. So 4 seconds, 5-second decay with a big mix, and it sounds like this. So that's where it starts to sound a bit more in tune. I think it's because it's holding that sort of root note in the reverb a little bit, so that's how it sort of levels out. But you get that detune and it gives it a bit of a wobble, and it sounds quite satisfying to me. And then I've thrown on a bandpass filter. So it sounds a bit more plucky, a little bit thinner now. So before it was like this. And now with it. So I'm kind of getting that with some of the lead sounds that Tycho's using. It sounds quite bandpassed, and it's really sort of blocking in that frequency range so that it will fit into the mix, and it doesn't have too much high end or too much low end because that's not very retro sounding. On top of that, I have also got a bit of a bus send to a stereo delay, so that'll delay the signal to the left and to the right. So that just sort of adds to the effect as well. You might be hearing a bit of ducking on that, so kind of sound to it. And that's because I have bussed it to bus 11 on its output. And on that output, I've got an LFO tool that is just doing some side chaining for every 1 in 4 beats. So it's like do, 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 every quarter beat. Next up, I've got this thin chord that I've called it. So let's have a listen to that. So I've taken mostly the same notes as I have done for that retro lead, and I've just kind of got them playing as chords. So this is also using the retro synth. It's a bit more of like a pad sound. So the filter envelope isn't like plucking, it's more of an open, slowly, stays persisting as a sustain, and then sort of decay off slowly as a kind of sound. And that is also mapped with the amp envelope as well. So I've got a similar tape delay effect on there. I've got a Valhalla vintage verb that is, the mix is really high, so it's making it sound more distant. So if I took that all the way down and push it up, it's not really audible, but it's sort of pushing a bit further into the distance. I've also got a channel EQ on there. So this is where I'm getting that thin sound from, because I'm taking out loads of that low end and pushing up that high end. So without it, it would sound like this. But with it, and that sound is also really far to the left and to the right in the mix. And that is achieved through the sample delay. So I've got a sample delay where it's got the left and the right delayed, so it sounds really wide in that mix. So that kind of gives it a bit more of a space and atmosphere, and it lets most of the instruments go down the middle and they can be really audible. And these thin chords are really low in the mix and just give that sort of atmospheric pad sound to the track. Let's listen to everything with those two synths in mind. Those thin chords are quite quiet, but that's what I say, it's just to add some atmosphere to the track. So next up, I've got this guitar pluck. Listening to Tycho, it's quite clear that he uses a lot of clean electric guitar sounds in his tracks, where he's plucking and got a lot of delay and reverb on those sounds. So to kind of get that into this piece, I've got this guitar pluck synth sound, but it has that sort of delay plucky sound that sort of emulates that guitar sound that I'm hearing. So let's have a listen to it. So that has been achieved with a preset for a guitar pluck on the Sculpture synth in Logic. I just used the preset to get that kind of plucking sound. It's got an amp on there, so it's got an emulation of an amplifier to give it that more of a guitar feel. I've put an echo on there, so that's what you're hearing with that sort of decayed, delayed sound. So if I take the processing off, it sounds more like this. Put on that echo. And then I've got a bus going off to a stereo delay. So I've got that stereo delay sound from before, and that gives it a bit more of a delayed sound. That's mostly where you're getting that sort of delayed plucking sound from. And then I've also put it to a Valhalla vintage verb. So that puts it in that retro sounding space. Next up, I've got this white noise synth. So it's just a continuous note, and I'm using the retro synth, but I've got the noise oscillator only. So it's pushed up on oscillator 1 with just the noise, and I've got the filter envelope slowly opening up and slowly closing. So this filter will go like that, and that's where I'm getting that sound. So let's have a listen to it on its own. And that's just something I'm hearing in Tycho. There's a lot of noise, a lot of white noise, a lot of hiss. And I think that sort of is intentional, and it gives an atmosphere to the track, and it sounds sort of like it's giving it some good space. So let's hear it. Next up, we've got bass guitar. So this is something I'm hearing in Tycho's tracks, is the use of real bass guitar sounds. So it's not like a bass synth, it's actually like he's playing some bass guitar on it. So let's listen to this on its own. And yeah, it's kind of got a little bit of that walking bass sound to it as well. So it's not just single notes playing, it's like boom, 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 boom. And that's kind of probably quite integral to getting that Tycho sound, is getting that sort of walking bass line as well. So for that, I've got this sampler. The sampler has a bass guitar sample, so I just loaded up that bass guitar preset. It's got a bass amp on there, so you know, this is just some sort of amp emulation going on, and a compressor. So I put a compressor on there to rein in those dynamics. But mostly this was just sort of a preset of a bass guitar, and I just sort of plugged in those MIDI notes to make it sound kind of Tycho-y. Cool, so that's it for the instrumentation parts of it. It's actually quite simple, the track, so let's just play all of the parts of the instruments without the drums. Okay, right, so next up, we've got these drums. So kind of retro, kind of a little bit synthwave sounding drums, and it's that sort of classic 80s sounding retro drum kit. It's a little bit disco sounding as well. So it's really 1/4 to the floor, just like kind of disco beat. First up, I've got just a kick, so just some kick that's got a decent amount of sub. So I was listening to some Tycho tracks and trying to get the kind of the kick and sort of drum samples generally dialed in to the right sample choices, and he's got quite a decent amount of sub in his kicks. So it's actually quite a powerful kick, but it's quite low in the mix, so it's like kind of quiet, but there's a lot of power in it. So if you turned it up, it would be really hard hitting kind of EDM 4 to the floor house music sound. So but because it's sort of dialed back in the mix, it's a bit more subtle, and it's got that driving retro feel to it. For the snare, it's a similar. So for that one, it's just sort of a classic snare sound, that's sort of an emulated snare sound, but it has a little bit of that natural actual hitting a snare sound to it, and I've layered that in with a second snare to give that. So the second one is a bit higher pitch, it's a little weaker, and the first one is a bit more lower and punchier, and layered together. For the snares, I've kind of rolled off some of the low ends with an EQ, and I've got it bust off to the stereo delay, so every time it hits that snare, it goes kind of sound to it. And I've got it going to the Valhalla Vintage Verb as well, which is just sort of a room snare sound. So if you listen to the snares, you might be able to hear that delay. Really quiet, and it's probably just for those with headphones on to be able to get that one. Next, I've got an open hi-hat sound. That happens every other kick. It's just to give that drive to the kicks. For the hi-hat, the closed hi-hat, I dragged a hi-hat sample into a sampler because I wanted to dial it in with some different velocities. So if I select the velocity, you can see how the different MIDI notes have different velocities to them. So they're just playing on every 1, 2, 3, 4 parts of that bar. So straight, just playing it straight, no swing, no groove, but we've got a little bit of velocity movement. So let's listen to it. So that velocity is just looped over and over again. And then I dragged the sample end down so it kind of is more deadened. It shortens the sample a little bit. And yeah, so I've only got that playing for the first half, and for the second half I take out that closed hi-hat sound. That sort of frees up a bit more space for those guitar plucks to come in. to get the retro sound on these drums, I've bussed all of the outputs to bus 10. So all of these drums, they are bussed to bus 10. So bus 10 is my drum bus. So if I just solo that, there's all of the drums playing together. So for that, I threw a compressor on there. Doesn't seem to be doing much compression actually. The main thing that is doing the sort of the character building of these drums is this tape delay. So I've got it, so there's no delay and it's just using the tape kind of character and modulation parts of it, so that I've got the dry signal down to 0 and the wet to 100%. I'm taking off a lot of that sort of absolute top end, so I'm deadening it, and I've got the clip threshold, so it's kind of clipping just a little bit. And then I've got a bit of modulation on the pitch. So it's probably not very audible, but I'm giving that sort of tape emulation sound. And also I've got a gain on there so that I could change the mono to 1. So I didn't want any of the sounds bleeding out to the left and to the right. I wanted it to be all dead center in the middle. And I'm hearing that in some of the sort of the Tycho mixes, is where his drums are all mono, just right down the middle. And they all sound very close and tight together, like you might do here in some sort of 80s disco track, for example, or some synthwave genres. So if I take off all of that drum bus processing and then put it on, it's just deadened, crunchier sounding, more monoed and sort of more retro sounding, less crisp and airy and more dead and crunchy. And yeah, that's actually it. That's one of the more simple ones I've done. It seemed to just kind of come together without too many instruments and without too many parts, and it gave it that sort of retro sound, and it really filled out the frequency spectrum and the mix, so I didn't really think that I needed to add too much more. So let's listen to it all together. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you have any questions about any of that, leave a comment down below and I'll get around to answering them. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like to really help out this channel, and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.